Resident Evil 0 for the longest time has always eluded me. I love Resident Evil. You guys know that. That insurmountable love I have for the series is spread across everything. Every main entry, every spin-off, every CG film or show, and even some of the live-action outings. I adore this series. But one game has always stood out in my mind. A game that I could never bring myself to consider good. A game that I was sure I would never revisit under any circumstances after finishing it back in 2020. Originally, I wasn't even going to review RE0 as part of this retrospective. I had an already outdated review of horrible audio that would have been shoved into the RE0 slot of this retrospective because I couldn't be bothered to revisit this game. But after realizing how lazy that was, I reconsidered and started playing RE0. After playing through it again on easy mode, I was astonished that my opinion hadn't changed one bit about the game. I really didn't like it. And after that realization, I quickly got to work. I was going to like this game, no matter what. I decided to get the full RE0 experience. I proceeded to beat the game 7 times on varying difficulties, read every file, and hunted for every trophy until I had the platinum. And after doing all of that, my opinion has barely changed. While I view RE0 in a more favorable light, I still can't bring myself to like this game. It sucks because I really wanted to. While it's split down the middle on whether fans hate or love this entry, a lot of people really enjoy it and I wanted to be one of them. However, while I don't like it, I certainly understand why others do, and I am happy to discuss it today as we review
Resident Evil 0.
Development on RE0 began in 1998, but the concept of the game itself dates back to the development of the original RE. The idea of a prequel that takes place before the events of RE1 was of great interest to Capcom, but for not the reason you might expect. You see, the main idea of the game was to take advantage of the Nintendo 64's newly announced add-on, the 64DD Peripheral, but after that add-on kind of flopped in terms of sales, the game was developed to fit the basic Nintendo 64 cartridge. Development ran smoothly, and on January 2000, it was officially announced to the public. But then Capcom ran into a snag. You see, they slowly realized that there was no way this game was going to fit on a single Nintendo 64 cartridge. Luckily, Nintendo's new powerhouse, the Nintendo GameCube, had been announced recently, so the game was developed instead to fit right alongside that console. With this, of course, the game was delayed to upgrade environments visually, add some more CG cutscenes, and make slight story changes. Then on November 10th, 2002, Resident Evil 0 released. Nowadays, RE0 is the definition of a hit or miss. Fans either love the game or despise it, which is very interesting considering Kovanka generally has the same stigma. You definitely got the basics of where I stand given the introduction to this video, but my thoughts are a little more complicated when it comes to this very interesting title. So enough stalling, let's get into RE0. Being released in the same year as Resident Evil Remake, it is uncanny how many similarities Zero shares with its older brother, especially visually. Much like Remake, the game opts for the uses of pre-rendered environments as opposed to 3D ones, and they look fantastic as well. What I'm showing you is gameplay of the 2002 Nintendo GameCube original version, and it looks impossible to have come out in that year. This should really demonstrate the raw power of the GameCube, and the devs took full advantage of it. The environments drip with impressive detail which further builds a sense of unease. As for the models, these are probably the most detailed models in a Resident Evil game at this point in the series. Fun fact, they actually had to descale the models in the original release for storage reasons, but they were thankfully restored in the HD re-release. As you should come to expect by now, the multiple monsters we come across in this game also have wonderful amounts of work put into them. Hell, even the gun models look great. The team used realistic airsoft guns for reference and apparently got the level of detail so precise that the models initially included replica markings and gas refill inlets by mistake and wasn't noticed till halfway through development. Oh, and as for the cutscenes, RE0 utilizes both in-game and CG cutscenes like its predecessors, and they look gorgeous. In-game is about what you expect, with good camera work and smooth animations. However, the CG is on a whole nother level. Not only does RE0 use loads of CG cutscenes, but the CG here looks gorgeously detailed. Just look at this snippet of a chandelier falling, or these leech eggs hatching. Even just the little things look so good. Yeah, graphically the game is a massive achievement. When it comes to the soundtrack, I do have to admit that it's sort of lacking this time around. Don't get me wrong, it's a decent soundtrack, but there aren't really a lot of standouts to me. With that said, the saving music in RE0, Safe Haven, is easily in my top 5 saving tracks. As for performances, this is another strong aspect of RE0. In Remake, their main intention was to have their characters be super believable in terms of performances and animations. In RE0, it appears to be the same case, mostly. River Lombardi makes a fantastic Rebecca Chambers and is uncannily similar to Hope Levy's performance as Rebecca in Remake. Same goes for James Key as Billy Coen. Richard Raw continues being iconic with his amazing portrayal of Albert Wesker, and while it's not clear who the hell voices William Birkin in this, they do a fine job. Unfortunately, the Mystery Man played by Leon Smith does not at all have a believable performance, but I don't even think that's the actor's fault. I'll talk about the Mystery Man later, but let's just say his dialogue didn't give Smith a lot to work with. So yeah, everything when it comes to presentation is pretty right on. But of course, the main course of conversation surrounding Zero extends well beyond its stellar presentation. Let's actually dive into gameplay. If you're familiar with classic RE titles, you should feel right at home with this one. Being a survival horror game, RE0 has you exploring environments and solving puzzles as you run into many threats that you have very limited resources to handle. So, you have to plan ahead and make critical decisions to not only conserve your resources, but to also, most importantly, keep yourself alive. While RE0 was criticized at the time of its release for its formula starting to become stale, the seamless survival horror gameplay here is something I personally can never get tired of, and it is Resident Evil Zero's greatest attribute. If you want a game that puts you in tight situations, has you strategizing for optimal outcomes, and immerses you in tense atmosphere, I could not recommend this game enough. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows as far as base mechanics go. You see, this game features two main characters, Rebecca and Billy, and these two survivors are going to stick with you for your entire journey because you control them both. This is RE0's most innovative feature, the partner mechanic. You can switch to whichever character you want to play as, with the other you aren't currently operating being controlled by AI. With the press of a button, you can order your partner to stay behind as you scout ahead, or you can band together and take out threats as a team. Originally, the idea of switching between two characters was to utilize the lack of loading times that came with the original N64 version. But when redesigning the game for Nintendo GameCube, the team had to get clever to make switching characters as seamless as it was planned to be, since this version of the game used more memory and storage than the original. And to their credit, that was an obstacle they overcame, since switching characters can only take a matter of seconds, even if they're super far away in another location. This partner mechanic is a very innovative feature that helps Zero stand out in the crowd. Unfortunately, the execution is absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, to the utmost degree, fucked. You quickly realize that instead of having a reliable partner, you're instead tasked with babysitting duty. While the AI is capable of simple commands such as following you around, it will brainlessly run into a zombie or get grabbed. You have to make sure it doesn't have any sort of powerful weapon equipped, since it will waste rare ammo on something as minuscule as leeches, and when it does assist you in combat, it shoots 1 bullet per hour. Your partner is totally useless and is honestly more of a hindrance than a help. Not only that, but it isn't even utilized to its fullest. There's not much conversating between the two characters, and the puzzles involving them working together usually boils down to one person standing in a spot and waiting for their partner to run to a separate spot. When it comes to how the characters play individually, Billy plays the role of a tank. He can take tons of damage and has an exclusive lighter that can be used to light Molotovs and for literally one puzzle. Rebecca can be put on caution on danger really easily, but can mix herbs and has an exclusive missing set used for puzzles and heals. I appreciate the effort to make these characters stand out, but most of the time you'll find yourself playing as Billy, since it's super easy to get Rebecca killed with her low health, which kinda sucks. I wish I could primarily play as Rebecca in this game, but doing so comes at the cost of tolerable HP. This partner system is unique and I love the concept, but unfortunately is a big con for me personally. But believe it or not, that is not the worst mechanic RE0 introduces. Nope. You see, in the past RE games, you really had to manage your inventory and make careful decisions on what items you want to take or leave behind in the item box, where all of your items you currently aren't using are stored. However, the devs wanted to add some extra difficulty to Resident Evil 0, and one of the ways they went about it was removing the item box altogether. Instead, you can pick up and drop items at will whenever you want. At first, this can be seen as a convenience, since if your inventory is full and you need to pick something up, you can just drop whatever you want on a whim and pick it up, as opposed to going all the way back to the item box. But you soon quickly realize that this sucks. You see, if you drop something in a faraway area and you realize you might need it, you need to run all the way back to pick it up. Keep in mind that both Rebecca and Billy have a collective of 12 inventory spots, with 3 and 4 of each need to go to weapons and ammunition. This creates loads of tedious backtracking since you're going to be dropping a lot of items and you'll never know when one of those items will be vital for progression. The best way to counter this is to make a makeshift inventory box and keep all the items you're not using together in one room. But then you realize you can only keep a certain number of items in a single room, so you have to find another place to store your other batch of items. And once you enter an entirely new area, guess what? You're going to make multiple trips to transfer all of your items to whatever new location you find yourself in. I am confused with what they were going for with this change. It doesn't necessarily make the game harder, it just creates loads of tedious backtracking. One thing I love about everyone who's played this game is how we all collectively have PTSD around the hookshot. I'm not even going to explain it, any of you who've played the game knows what I'm talking about. But listen, let's change things up and talk about something positive. What does RE0 do right? Well, there are the puzzles. Resident Evil 0 might just have the best puzzles out of the Resident Evil series. While most Resident Evil puzzles involve picking up an item and backtracking to the part of the environment that coincides to that item, Resident Evil 0 has that and a collection of clever hints that can be found in both nodes and the environment alike. There are also physical puzzles as well that really require you to really use your brain, sometimes while under pressure. Not only are the puzzles featured in Resident Evil 0 fun, but they also have a great deal of effort put into them and really makes you feel a sense of satisfaction upon solving one. But of course, what would be a Resident Evil game without a unique selection of varied threats lurking around every corner? Switching over to enemy types, the first of which are your casual zombies. They're your typical shambling threats that need to be either maneuvered around or put to rest permanently. You should know the drill by now, a couple of handgun bullets or a shotgun blast to the head will do the job just fine. I find that RE0 has just enough zombies to make the game difficult, but doesn't overblow the amount to make the overall experience unbalanced. Cerberuses are also a staple that make a return and they're standard as far as Cerberuses go. They only show up for one section and are practically forgotten about. Afterwards are the leeches. They're very easy, but holy shit can sometimes be a little annoying. In certain rooms and situations, leeches will swarm you, and if you stand there for long enough, you'll start taking minor damage. It's not the worst thing in the world dealing with these leeches, but they were kind of unnecessary. Though it's fun to squish them. The next enemy lined up are the crows, who also make a return from previous entries. They're also pretty annoying since I swear up and down you can't dodge them if they decide to attack you, but they won't present too much of a problem, especially if you're playing as Billy. What is a problem are the humanoid leeches, which is made apparent by the blasting theme that plays every time you encounter them. These humanoid leeches can take loads of punishment, attack quickly and viciously, and can drain you of your health pretty quickly. Not to mention they blow up and deal damage to anyone standing nearby if killed unconventionally. That's right, I said unconventionally. You see, they'll counter our Molotov cocktails that you can obtain when combining bottles scattered around the area with Billy's lighter. The thing is, these Molotovs aren't the assured destructive method you initially think they are. Especially on higher difficulties, the humanoid leeches can take multiple cocktails and aren't even stunned when hit with them, basically guaranteeing you damage taken. Granted, they can be avoided pretty easily if you run past them, but there are several key items that can only be obtained in rooms where these fuckers are present, and on your first playthrough, you won't automatically know where these items are, forcing you to confront them. Yeah, these enemies, while creative, aren't necessarily scary and are more bothersome than anything. Then there are the plague crawlers that I felt were pretty balanced enemy types. They're essentially giant insects that can certainly take damage to present a challenge, but as long as you're smart and use the right weaponry, they can prove a breeze to get past. Another returning enemy are the giant spiders, who are especially annoying in this one. Multiple halls are crawling with these things, making it nearly impossible to not get struck with venom and possibly poison when traversing them. They don't show up often, but man they suck, and also mess with my arachnophobia. But man, if you thought those were bad, just get a load of these things. The Eliminators. Zombified apes that are hard to hit, have a ton of HP, and can stun lock you to oblivion. Luckily, the Eliminators aren't present through most of the game, but it's easy to see why. They are some nasty little fuckers that can take you out if you're not careful. Yet another returning enemy are the Hunters. They're as fast, vicious, and scary as the previous entries, but might as well not be in the game. They show up very briefly in 2 rooms. Come on. And last but certainly least is the fucking Lurker Frog. A giant frog that will randomly appear in certain parts of the final area. This thing absolutely serves no purpose but to present the player with a possible insta-kill, and it is bullshit. Even if you kill it, it just respawns later. Whoever came up with the idea of this enemy just wants humanity to suffer. So yeah, the enemy types would be good if the fantastic recurring enemies weren't shoved to the sidelines and if most of the original enemies were more tolerable. But if you were disappointed by the mid enemy types, then just wait until we get to the bosses. RE1 had you encounter Jan the Snake, RE2 had William Birkin, RE3 had Nemesis, Code Veronica had a Tyrant, and RE Remake had an Elder Crimson Head. But what's the first terrifying obstacle you encounter in this game? A giant scorpion. Why is there a giant scorpion? Fuck you, that's why. Also, this boss is lavishly easy to stunlock. Pathetic. But if you thought the giant scorpion was scary, brace yourself for the giant centipede. Woo! Yeah, this boss doesn't even attack you, it just sort of incidentally runs into you. Also, why are you confronted by a giant centipede? Why is it here? Fuck you, that's why. Seriously, this boss just exists to run through ammo. But keeping up with the theme of giant real-world creatures, look! A giant bat! Yeah, this thing confronts you in a cathedral and is easily the worst boss in the game. You see, it's already hard to hit since it's flying around, but then it has its baby bats show up that will have your character auto-aiming at them instead of the actual obstacle. It's annoying as hell, and can you guess why this bat shows up? Just guess. Are you ready? Because fuck you, that's why. After that is the Proto-Tyrant, who is actually a really cool boss conceptually. We know that the first perfect tyrant you see at the end of RE1 was the accumulation of numerous failed experiments that came before it. Encountering one of the imperfected tyrants is an awesome idea, and the design of this Proto-Tyrant is sick, and really in line with a prequel. Unfortunately, it's a boss fight that is completely uninteresting like the others. If you're wondering how or why a Proto-Tyrant is just wandering around, fuck you, that's why. But after the initial fight, you encounter the tyrant again with both of your characters this time, and while the fight is a little more interesting with the addition of a partner and a more interesting playing space, it's still a pretty boring fight. Also, if you're wondering how the tyrant wandered away from the factory and somehow found its way in the water of the treatment plant where it emerges right as our characters are passing by it, fuck you, that's why. Lastly, there's the final boss, which is actually a good fight. Not only does it actually make sense for the fucking thing to be there, but the first phase is a tight, intense battle that requires both teamwork and all the resources you've scrounged up thus far. It's a tense and hectic fight that's pretty suitable for a final boss, and things only get more hectic with Phase 2. In Phase 2, you have to protect Rebecca from the boss as she works on opening the ceiling that will expose the creature to sunlight. It's a pretty creative and intense final boss that I'm really fond of. While the final boss is pretty sick, the big bad boss fights featured in Zero are just not it, chief. Most of them are harmless, one is a pain in the ass, and the final one is actually fun, but they for the most part are uninspired and lazy. Hopefully the weaponry you receive throughout your journey will make up for it. Like every RE game that's come before it, one of the first weapons in your arsenal like always is a knife. Don't get your hopes up, it's not a Code Veronica knife, so it's only useful for a last resort like usual. Then there's two separate handguns, Rebecca's S.T.A.R.S issued handgun and Billy's army handgun. It's a popular myth that Billy's handgun is better than Rebecca's, but after doing some digging online, that's only believed because of Billy's faster fire rate. In reality, they're the same and are useful in dispatching the undead as well as similar enemies. But that's not all. If you pick up an optional key later in the game and use it to unlock an easy to open briefcase, you'll receive handgun parts that will upgrade whatever handgun of your choice. This upgrade increases both weapon damage and fire rate, and I love it. Upgradable weapons in classic RE games are always fun and rewarding ways of taking a nearly useless or underwhelming weapon and using it to turn the odds against your numerous opponents. There's also the Molotovs I mentioned earlier that are mainly useful as counters against humanoid leeches. Then there's the first shotgun of the game, the hunting rifle. A shotgun that, while it's somewhat reliable, falls short of it only taking 2 shells at a time. That is until you switch it out for the much superior regular shotgun that can take 7 shells as opposed to 2. You'll find yourself relying on this weapon to get easy decapitations on inconveniently placed zombies or to deal with enemies that have relatively large HP as well as bosses. Then there's the returning grenade launcher that can fire grenade, acid, and flame rounds. Not much to say about this powerhouse, it's perfect to use on bosses and is consistently reliable for larger enemies, but good luck carrying 3 types of ammo everywhere you go with 6 item slots. And finally there's the Magnum, the in-game weapon that is nearly an insta-kill to everything in the game, but should be saved for an immense threat like the final boss. That's all for the base game weapons, and while there aren't a whole lot of original ones except for the hunting rifle and Molotovs, there's nice enough variety and each weapon serves a specific purpose. But what about unlockable weapons? Well, if you beat the game in under 5 hours, you get a submachine gun. While it does have limited ammo, it completely shreds through enemies and bosses alike, which makes for a nice reward. By playing the extra mode in RE0 named Leech Hunter and finishing it with a B rank, you will unlock the Magnum Revolver, an even more powerful magnum that will blast through everything in your path. And by beating the game in under 3 hours and 30 minutes, the ultimate reward is the returning Infinite Rocket Launcher, an unstoppable beast of a weapon that will nearly kill everything in the game instantaneously. A badass reward for a badass achievement. And yeah, that sums up Resident Evil Zero's arsenal, and it's pretty great. While there's not too much originality in their weapon choices, the ones they chose to feature in the game are great and vary in terms of utility, and the unlockable weapons you can unlock are amazing rewards as well. However, what about the environments? Resident Evil is a series that immerses you with its well-detailed and eerie locations. Does Resident Evil 0 deliver? Well, yes and no. Starting with the train, it's without doubt the best area in the game. Not only is the train a pretty damn unique location for Resident Evil, but the atmosphere here is great. The calm, warm interior of the train littered with corpses that don't belong, combined with the ferocity of the pouring rain and rushing wind outside, makes for some effective, classic RE atmosphere. Also, the train doesn't overstay its welcome. You feel good exploring and finding your way through it, and it ends in a pretty climactic fashion where both characters have to trigger the emergency brakes and then enact the timer before the train crashes. It's a pretty awesome location, which is a direct contrast to the next area, the Umbrella Training Facility. The idea of exploring the very facility where all the Umbrella higher-ups are trained is pretty cool on paper, but visually, the area could not be any more bland. The music used here is boring, the rooms are boring, and the layout takes inspiration from the Spencer Mansion and just winds up coming off as a dollar store version of it. The only interesting room is Dr. Marcus's torture chamber because it looks genuinely disturbing, but everywhere else is uninteresting. It also does not help that this section of the game drags, and is easily the longest section. The only thing I can give it is it has some good puzzles, but that's about it. Thankfully, the lab is a welcome change. See, it has Rebecca and Billy split up with the only thing connecting them being a service lift that can be used to exchange items. It feels good slowly unlocking two sides of the same area with both characters, and just like the train, it knows right when to end. My only complaint is that the lab does lack the clean, high-tech scenery present in the other games, and it doesn't really feel like a lab. Still, a cool area. The next area is the factory, which is definitely the shortest out of the bunch. It has this nice, rusty industrial look to it, and being split apart from Billy does make you feel vulnerable. There's only two issues with the factory. One, I wish you stuck around just a little more. All you do is use a key, take an elevator, and fight the prototype in before you leave. It's super short, and second, you oddly find yourself in familiar territory. You're in the RE2 laboratory, except not really. It turns out that it's another lab altogether with the exact same layout. While I appreciate the nod, it's never conveyed to you directly that this is a different lab, so first you'll be confused as to what an underground Raccoon City laboratory is doing all the way in the Arklay Mountains. Overall, decent area, but it does go by really fast. And finally, the treatment plant is an okay final area. I love the aquatic feel of the facility, and it doesn't take too long to beat. Though there's not a lot of good puzzles here, and for some reason, there's a lot of backtracking in this area. And fuck the Loco Fog. So yeah, the environments aren't really anything to write home about, and the pacing is all over the place, ranging from balanced to way too quick to mind-numbingly slow. Well, I think with that, we've basically covered everything relating to the base experience. But what about extra content? We're starting with difficulty modes. We have the simple, easy, normal, and hard difficulty mode. Easy is only an option in the modern HD release, but it's the one I recommend for newcomers. This game is hard for a lot of game design issues I mentioned earlier, and playing on easy is a good way of getting used to mechanics and experiencing the story for the first time. Trust me, for how tricky this game is, there is no shame in playing on easy. Normal is what I recommend for your second run, or for RE veterans craving either a strict survival horror experience, or to experience RE0 in the way it was meant to be played. Normal isn't that bad, and it is a balanced experience when replaying the game. It gives you just enough resources to get by fine, while also requiring you to make smart decisions. Hard mode is completely fucked. You will spend all of your time just barely getting by on ammo, enemies can take an absurd amount of punishment, and both Billy and especially Rebecca can be killed super easily. When playing this mode, I heard so many horror stories of people not physically being able to beat the final boss due to a lack of ammunition, but luckily I was able to scrape by with just 15 handgun bullets to spare. While it was a fun challenge, I wouldn't risk Resident Evil 0 hard difficulty on my worst enemy. That's probably why there aren't any additional difficulty modes like there are in most RE games. The game cannot get any harder than this, but it can get easier. Enter Wesker mode. Holy shit guys, I cannot think of a cooler way to play a Resident Evil game. In this mode, Billy is swapped out with iconic series villain Wesker, who has two incredible abilities. The first is a shadow dash that allows you to run across rooms in seconds, though it is only useful in linear hall since it's pretty hard to control. The other one, however, is the Death Stare, an ability that can instantly decapitate any zombie. What's even cooler is that this ability can be charged up. The more charged it is, the bigger the range. This ability is so much fun, it can even work on bosses as well. Oh, and Wesker can thankfully mix fucking herbs, unlike Billy. While Wesker still has Billy's voice during cutscenes, his in-game dialogue has DC Douglas's voice, which sounds just as spectacular as the great Richard Waugh. Not only is Wesker here, but Rebecca has an alternate costume that sees her in a way darker appearance along with a device that implies she's being mind-controlled to follow Wesker. Overall, rescue mode is a fucking blast that you can unlock simply by beating the game on any difficulty. This is how you do unlockables. There's also another extra game mode, Leech Hunter, which kind of fills that mercenaries and battle game role of RE0. It is a harmless arcade addition that sees you and your AI partner running around and hunting for leeches in the training facility that is full of monsters. Your objective is to collect as many leeches as possible, which sounds easy enough until you realize you can only pick up a stack of 10 leeches out of 100. Half of the leeches are only able to be picked up by Rebecca, and with the other half being picked up by Billy, and these leeches cannot be exchanged nor dropped. So the further you get in collecting leeches, the less inventory space you'll have for items that can fend off countless number of enemies around you. This is a really cool and unique challenge. Until you realize you can just run around, kill every enemy in the training facility, and then collect all the leeches. But it's still a cool idea nonetheless. What's even better is that this mode has its fair share of awards on normal and hard. There's a grading system that's solely dependent on how many leeches you collected. The lower ranks contain small rewards like infinite pistol ammo or whatever, but getting all 100 leeches will grant you infinite ammo that can be used for every weapon in the main game. While this reward may not be all that useful considering you might already have the infinite rocket launcher by then, it's still a really cool reward. And of course, if you still want more reasons to revisit RE0, you can always go back and speedrun it to see what's the fastest time you can get possible. If you're a fan of Resident Evil 0, there is fortunately plenty of things to keep you coming back if you get tired of the main game. But if you haven't caught on yet, there is a major part of this game that I haven't even touched on yet. Something that, to me at least, is one of the most essential to any Resident Evil game. The narrative. While Resident Evil is primarily known for its gameplay, it is certainly a story-driven series, and with Resident Evil 0 being a prequel, it is bound to have an interesting story. Right? Well, let's talk about it. The game opens up with a train carrying relaxed passengers when suddenly a shadowy figure overlooking the train summons its army of leeches to board and kill everyone on it, all while he's singing opera. I wish I was making this shit up, but no, that's how the game really starts. Afterward, we follow the S.T.A.R.S Bravo team on the night before the events of RE1. While flying over Raccoon Forest, the helicopter gets a sudden engine failure and they make an emergency landing. Now starting out with an immediate positive, it's awesome getting to follow a Bravo team for once. In RE1, most of the Bravo team is either dead or doomed to perish, so it's cool seeing all of them alive and well. Unfortunately, that doesn't last very long, since immediately after landing, they stumble across a wrecked military transporter, 2 dead soldiers presumably killed by the convict being transported, Billy Coen, who was court-martialed on July 22nd, my birthday, and sentenced to death. Bravo team splits up to find him, and that is the last we see of them with the exception of one appearance from Edward and another from Enrico. Wow. Listen, I'm all open for prequels having their own identity and exploring new ideas, but man, this game just threw away what could have been a really cool concept. Like I said, in RE1, we barely got to know anything about the members in Bravo team, and didn't feel any type of emotion upon seeing them dead. How cool would it have been if RE0 had these characters play more prominent roles in the game, and gave more insight on who they are as people? Not only would it be interesting, but it would add so much to the story of RE1, and would make scenes like Kenneth getting chewed on by a zombie, and discovering Forrest's mutilated body way more impactful, as any good prequel should do. But as you know, this game isn't a Bravo team story, it's a Rebecca and Billy story. Speaking of which, Rebecca finds her way into a seemingly empty train where we get one of the most underwhelming first zombie reveals in the series. Rebecca continues forward when at last she is confronted by Billy Coen at gunpoint. And initially, Billy shows a lot of promise as a character. Not only does he have a cool demeanor, but him murdering 2 soldiers along with a later revelation that he has murdered 23 people gives him an intimidating presence and a veil of mystery. And seeing Rebecca try her best to keep her cool and try to establish some authority while simultaneously not being taken seriously in the slightest by Billy already creates a really engaging dynamic between the two. After Billy leaves, Edward comes crashing through a window and warns Rebecca of what's out in Raccoon Forest in one of the most awkward ways possible.
We can't. You must be careful, Rebecca. The forest is full of zombies and monsters.
Zombies and monsters?
Rebecca continues to the train when she's once again confronted by Billy who wants to work together, but Rebecca refuses to work with a murderer, and for some reason, instead of trying to arrest Billy, she continues forward and comes across a weird passenger. However, weird doesn't cut it. Rebecca gets swarmed when she's saved by Billy, and the two gawk at the mysterious figure outside the window. Seriously, how is this supposed to be scary, guys? Some Final Fantasy-esque stranger singing opera on a mountain of leeches is beyond parody level. Anyways, Billy and Rebecca reluctantly agree to work together, and guys, I'm not even kidding, after this moment, there was no more hostility between the pair. It took only the opening of the game before the S.T.A.R.S rookie and convicted convict became a dream team. I really did like how these two played off each other at first, but unfortunately, it's just one of many missed opportunities with this game. After being split up temporarily, fighting a giant scorpion that shows up for no reason, and solving puzzles, the two make it to the front of the train. Meanwhile, we see a new perspective that's sure to get any Resident Evil fan excited. William Birkin and Albert Wesker in the same room, working together. What's even cooler is that this game later confirms that both Wesker and William have known each other for years now, and were even rivals within Umbrella before coming to work together. As a side note, in Wesker's report, which is a mockumentary made by Capcom that showed Wesker's perspective of the first 3 games, it's confirmed that the enhanced abilities we see him have in Code Veronica are from Birkin's G virus, which would later go into be retconned to progenitor strain. Both Albert and Wesker being somewhat partners is a really awesome addition this game made, and here we see them trying to investigate how the T-Virus was leaked in both the mansion and now this train. Rebecca and Billy decide to work together to stop the out-of-control train, and after doing so, they crash near a sewer entrance that leads to the Umbrella training facility. This is where we're introduced to the director of the facility, Dr. Marcus. Back to Wesker and Birkin, they are greeted by this opera-singing gentleman who confronts the pair on seemingly having Dr. Marcus killed. Already, there's a lot of mystery surrounding both this facility, who this villain is, Billy as a person, Albert and William's connection to Marcus, and how the T-Virus was leaked. While I would say this is all too much for a prequel, it's clear that RE0 isn't necessarily trying to be a straight prequel to the first game, despite what the name suggests. Its main goal is to be a complex, isolated story that so happens to take place before RE1, and answer a few lingering questions. So I will compliment the game on how much mystery it does indeed set up, and does start out strong. As the game progresses, you find out that this training facility was used to train aspiring Umbrella scientists, and among these students were Wesker and Birkin, who later became Marcus's lab assistants due to how much promise they both showed. You also learn much more about Dr. Marcus, who turns out to have been one of the 3 founders of Umbrella, along with Edward Ashford and Oswald E. Spencer. Dr. Marcus was assigned to this training facility where he would go on to secretly experiment on his own students, with the leeches that he strangely grew attached to and viewed as his own children. He also created the T-Virus as we know it through leech DNA, that will later go on to be clarified was a specific strain. While I think the whole Umbrella training facility is a little bit of a goofy lore contribution, everything involving Dr. Marcus is genuinely kind of fascinating. If you're wondering why I haven't touched on Rebecca and Billy at all, the earlier issue I brought up of no hostility between the two is not the main issue. No, these two barely interact at all throughout the game. I'm not joking, for a game that's solely centered around these 2 characters, they barely interact at all outside of gameplay. The most we get is Billy having to save Rebecca's ass twice, once from a giant centipede that comes out of nowhere, and another where she's about to fall to her death. While this is going on, we get a cutscene showing Wesker and William splitting ways that comes with a lot of hilariously forced fan service.
I have finished the research on the T-Virus, but I need a little more time to complete the more powerful G-Virus.
I will follow my initial plan and lure the S.T.A.R.S members into the mansion. Their superior combat training should make them perfect test subjects.
Anyways, Billy saves Rebecca, and we finally get to learn Billy's backstory. During a secret mission to infiltrate a guerrilla hideout in Africa that ended with most of his squad dead, it turns out Billy and the survivors was given wrong information and was led to a small village instead. Outraged, the leader ordered the execution of the innocent villagers, and it being heavily implied Billy didn't actually kill anyone. While it's not the worst backstory in the world, and it explains Billy's army handgun and firearm experience, it just reveals Billy was an innocent man falsely framed, which is super predictable and honestly kind of boring. And yes, those 2 soldiers we saw at the beginning of the game were killed by Cerberuses. Anyways, the 2 find a way out of the training facility, find their way into a lab that leads to a cable car when Billy is abruptly attacked and the 2 are separated. With Rebecca on her own, she continues to the factory where she finally reunites with Enrico. This leads to a very good and kind of sad cutscene where Rebecca doesn't follow Enrico to the Spencer mansion, and instead insists on finding Billy before promising to catch up to her captain. But as we all know, this will be the last time they ever see each other because of Enrico's death at the hands of Wesker in RE1. Granted, this cutscene would have so much more weight if we saw more of Rebecca and Billy's relationship, but it's still a good scene. Immediately afterward, Rebecca is confronted by the prototype, which, like I said earlier, is an awesome idea. However, this is where Rebecca Chambers defeats the prototype all by herself, which presents a great time for me to bring up a glaring issue of this game's story. Rebecca's inconsistency. In RE1, it was clear that Rebecca was a very inexperienced rookie who was surprisingly level-headed when faced with the unprecedented situation she found herself in, but at the same time lacked the combat experience of her fellow teammates. This is likely because Shinji Mikami wasn't really a fan of Rebecca due to her lack of independence, and when working on this game, encouraged the writers to make her more of a badass. This creates a huge continuity problem between RE1 and Zero, which gets worse once you realize Rebecca never tells anyone in RE1 about what she saw the night before, which would have been really helpful information. Ironic that a prequel creates more questions than it does answer them. After that, she reunites with Billy, who is shocked to see all the students used for Dr. Marcus's research. The two work their way to the treatment plant when they finally come face to face with this opera-singing weirdo, who reveals himself to be Dr. Marcus. Sort of. Throughout the notes in the game, it's revealed Marcus and Spencer alike had growing distrust between them that led to Spencer assigning Wesker and Birkin to betray and assassinate Marcus. However, afterward, the Queen Lee she was experimenting on crawled inside his corpse and consumed both his DNA and memories over the next several years, until it took on the identity of Dr. Marcus and believed itself to actually be him. After being reborn, Leech Marcus was actually the one who spread the virus across Raccoon Forest and the mansion. Some people prefer the T-virus spread in the mansion to be an accident that was alluded to in the original game as opposed to purposely spread by Leechy Boy, but I don't mind this revelation. And the Queen Leech twist is actually kind of neat, though the hilarious voice acting and the dialogue in the scene certainly doesn't help.
10 years ago, Spencer had me assassinated.
I will take over your research.
Now I will have my revenge on Umbrella, and the world will burn in an inferno of hate.
You'll pay for what you've done.
We'll see which one of us is gonna die.
Afterward, Leech Marcus starts mutating for some reason, and a battle ensues that continues escalating as the self-destruct sequence is triggered by Birkin. After figuring out the Queen Leech can't stand sunlight, Billy covers Rebecca as she opens the ceiling, and once she's done, the Queen Leech is finished.
Hey, Queenie! Feast on this!
After the training facility blows the fuck up, Rebecca sees the Spencer mansion and decides to follow her team there, but not before dealing with her convict.
I guess it's time to say goodbye. Officially, Lieutenant Billy Coen is dead.
Yeah, I'm just a zombie now. Thank you, Rebecca.
And that was Resident Evil Zero. What a weird fucking story. On one hand, there are plenty of neat lore contributions. The background behind Marcus, the first created T-virus strain, and the partnership between Wesker and Birkin were all pretty cool. On the other hand, there are several huge flaws, with the main one being the characterization of our two main characters. Billy starts out interesting but has no personality, and Rebecca is only interesting due to her being an established person, but even she's kind of ruined by the glaring inconsistency of her character between this and RE1. Speaking of which, this game barely does anything to set up the events of RE1, which could be forgiven if it answered a lot of questions about the Umbrella Company, and while it does do that a little bit, it mainly focuses on Dr. Marcus, who could have been left out of the series entirely and it wouldn't have changed anything. That to me is the biggest flaw of this game's narrative, and Marcus itself has a prequel that would give context to the background of Umbrella and the viruses, but it could be completely ignored, and honestly the series would make more sense than if you had played it. As a prequel, it fails, and as an isolated story, it's completely uninteresting. In conclusion, Resident Evil 0 is the definition of a mixed bag. I went into this game sure as could be that I was going to hate it. Yet upon experiencing more of it, doing some research, and seeing what both positive and negative critiques others had of the game, I have a newfound appreciation for Zero. The ideas it had were super ambitious and it can be fun at times, and the story has a lot of potential. But ultimately, the core new mechanics just don't work in my opinion, and the story absolutely squanders that potential. There are many things to like about RE0. I can't even bring myself to call it a bad game, but it is just too frustratingly clumsy in a lot of areas, and at the end of the day, just doesn't work.